Joining us now from outside of the Supreme Court, NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, Slate senior editor and legal correspondent, and MSNBC law and politics analyst Dahlia Lithwick. Also, University of California Davis law professor and author of Dollars for Life, the Anti-Abortion Movement and the Fall of the Republican Establishment, Mary Ziegler. Dahlia, you've been covering the court for years. I want to start with you on this. What was your sense of where this might be going?
I mean, I can't tell you where it's going, Katie. It's hard to tell how some of the really crucial justices, particularly John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh, where they landed today. I can tell you, I'm trying to think of a more gendered argument. I can't in my entire life think of an argument in which every single woman, including Amy Coney Barrett, including the Solicitor General, Elizabeth Prelogar, was talking about preeclampsia, was talking about ectopic pregnancy, was talking about blood and what it is to be helicoptered out of states. And you had every single male justice with almost no exceptions. And as you just heard, the attorney for the state of Idaho talking about, the Hyde Amendment, talking about, the spending clause, talking about these unbelievably, in some cases, not briefed legal questions just so they wouldn't have to talk about women's health. It was quite staggering, the divide between what one half of the court was talking about today and the other was like nothing I have ever witnessed, including in Dobbs.
It was so remarkable listening to Justice Sotomayor and Justice Amy Coney Barrett go back and forth with the attorney for Idaho there, talking about cases where the doctor's judgment just might not be enough and how vague the standard is. And I found that to be just really illuminating about at least where the women on the court stand. Yamiche, what was it like outside of the court today? There's always so much protesting going on during these big cases. What did you see today?
There was a lot of protests, much more than usual here at the Supreme Court, because, of course, this is a significant abortion case. So I talked to a number of people on both sides of this issue. I will say that the crowd here seemed to be more in favor of abortion rights. I talked to a number of people who said that they are really worried that when a woman has an emergency situation when she's pregnant, that she is really going to have her life be put in danger, not just in Idaho, but in a number of states that have these trigger laws. I also even talked to a doctor from Idaho who said there's really a chilling effect going on because a lot of doctors are very, very worried about going to jail. So in the middle of emergency rooms, wanting to maybe treat a woman who's not on death's door, but who is close to it, who's maybe developing an infection, or who maybe even her reproductive organs might be failing. But these doctors are scared because they don't want to be thrown in jail by prosecutors, much like what Amy Coney Barrett was talking about, this idea that a prosecutor could disagree with the medical judgment of a doctor like the one that was protesting today. But I also did talk to some people who are opponents of abortion access who were also at the court today, and they were basically saying that Idaho's law, that they feel it's sufficient enough to help with women. Katie?
Yamiche, thank you very much. In listening to the arguments, Mary, one of the arguments made was a question about what exactly it means to have a woman's life in danger and whether it really means to be on death's door, or if it would be if they were to lose an organ, maybe their reproductive organs or something else in the course of losing the baby and getting to the point where a medically approved abortion can be done, a safe one, I guess, in terms of the legal standard in the state of Idaho. And it was striking that the lawyer for Idaho said that losing an organ wouldn't be covered.
Yeah, I mean, that's accurate in terms of what a lot of conservative lawmakers think, right? One of the themes you heard, I think, throughout the questioning was both Mr. Turner representing Idaho and some of the conservative justices suggesting that health exceptions were unworkable because they would somehow open the door to elective abortions, right? They would open the door to abortions in cases of mental health. So I think part of what you were seeing essentially was the attorney for Idaho saying, yes, losing an organ is less bad, right, than opening the door to abortions for any reason. And that was the judgment the state of Idaho made, and not a surprising one given what the anti-abortion movement argues.
Let me ask you about this, Dahlia, because we're talking about a standard, and this has been the case with all of these examples that we've seen throughout the country of women saying they need an abortion and doctors saying, I'm not quite sure if this is the right moment, and saying how they have to ask not their medical judgment or a medical panel in the building. They're talking to their lawyers. Here's what one of the letters from several medical associations submitted to the court today. They said, when is it certain she will die but for medical intervention? How many blood units does she have to lose? 1, 2, 5? How fast does she have to be bleeding? Soaking through 2 pads an hour? 3? How low does her blood pressure need to be? 90 over 60, 80 over 50? This is the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American College of Emergency Physicians, and American Medical Association, all of them writing to the Supreme Court looking for a standard. What's striking here is that these are medical professionals asking a bunch of lawyers what the medical standard needs to be.
It's funny in that clip you played earlier, Katie, where Justice Alito was suggesting that if the attorney from Idaho had a little more time with those medical scenarios, he could have answered them better, as though maybe judges and lawyers are really, really good at emergency medicine. I mean, that's exactly the way we got into trouble here. These are emergency room physicians under EMTALA, which has been the law since 1986. They know what stabilizing care looks like. And it's not a question of looking over your shoulder to see, is the prosecutor on one hand going to take away your medical license or put you in jail for 2 years? Or on the other hand, are you going to get sued for delaying care, which happens all the time? They're in an intolerable position when lawyers on both sides are making determinations about how you give stabilizing care in the emergency room. This is the thing they know how to do. And so the real kind of tragedy here is that we have a basic unified standard of care around the country, and Idaho and 6 other states are creating a carve-out for abortion, and all it's doing is having a bunch of lawyers substitute their judgment, not in the moment, as you say, but after the fact, to decide if a doctor should go to jail, and this is why doctors are fleeing Idaho.
And that's why doctors are just too scared. They don't want to risk their medical license. They don't want to risk their freedom. They could be put in jail, as you mentioned, and it's all on the basis of not what, medical professionals are saying, but what prosecutors decide. Mary, let me ask you this. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of Idaho, what does that mean?
Well, it depends. I think one of the other kind of questions that I didn't know how to answer listening to this argument was how Idaho would win, how big Idaho would win, what would the rationale be. But one thing that'll be clear is that even more patients who are pregnant facing medical emergencies will get turned away from receiving emergency treatment. And we know this is true not just for patients seeking abortion, but for patients who are pregnant really facing any medical emergency. The Associated Press reported just last week on a number of emergency departments that were turning away pregnant patients experiencing all kinds of medical emergencies because they would afraid that that would somehow raise questions related to abortion, right? And that's at a time when, in theory, this question about EMTALA is unsettled. So we can be pretty confident that if the Supreme Court sides with Idaho, the reality on the ground will get even uglier for pregnant patients. That's one thing that does seem clear.
Dalia, what I think is striking, it feels like there's this perception that getting pregnant and having a baby is easy and that it's no big deal. Women do it every day. It's not that complicated. It's not that dangerous. But when in reality, if you've had a kid and you've been pregnant, you know that it is very scary and can be very dangerous up until the moment you give birth and then the moments afterwards. I mean, it is not as routine. I mean, it's routine because it's done all the time, but it's not necessarily just a straightforward thing.
It's not, and I think one of the reasons that we heard what we heard from the women justices today and from the Solicitor General is because, I talked to an ER doctor last week for my podcast and said 1 in 5 of the cases that she sees in her ER is miscarriage or pregnancy related. This happens all the time. Sometimes people don't know they're pregnant, but this is a huge part of emergency medicine. And sometimes, to hear the justices, some of the male justices, talk about the spending clause or talk about states' rights as though this is sort of like an interesting intellectual puzzle and a constitutional theoretical problem. Because I think they've been watching too many Hallmark movies where babies pop out fully formed, pink and rosy in a little hat. But that's just not how fertility works. It's not how pregnancy works. It's in some sense the problem we saw with the Alabama IVF ruling, where we have an incredible incredibly cartoonish sense of how pregnancy and, as you said, labor and delivery work. And that's just not the reality on the ground in any emergency room, in any OBGYN office.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I mean, until I got pregnant, I don't think I fully understood what it was like and how scary it could be and all the complications that were out there. And what giving birth would be like. I mean, it is a lot more complicated. It is a lot more dangerous than we are led to believe, culturally speaking, in this country. It does, many times, many cases, when we watch it on TV or in a movie, look like a Hallmark movie, as you were saying, Dahlia. Mary Ziegler, Dahlia Lithwick, ladies, thank you very much for joining us.